Hey, everybody, and welcome to installment 4 of the Resistance Recovery Big Book Conversations. Once again, James is coming at you from Wisconsin, and I am back at the Elson Center where I'm increasingly thinking I belong. I should not be allowed to leave. So if you want to pay for me to do that, let me know. So we are here at the final stretch, the um, the B of service steps,
Yeah.
but also 9. The end of the clean house and the B of service steps 9 through 12.
Right.
And any leading thoughts?
Yeah, I do have something about amends before we move into 10, 11, 12 stuff. Um, and one thing is that like throughout these conversations, we've been, thinking about the big book and our experiences with it, but also like from a resistance recovery angle. And one thing that we've run into has been that the resistance recovery way of thinking, whatever that is, seems to butt heads with the sort of personal responsibility ethos of 12-step culture. When you're thinking about social causes and higher level stuff, and the sensibilities about, well, what is the role of the individual in this? And, in the 12 steps, of course, it's central. It's sort of a penitent spirituality. It's about me confessing my wrongs and me making right for them. And in amends, you sort of have that coming to its head, right? It's like the big act of personal responsibility is showing up to someone you've harmed and saying, I did that. I'm here to turn myself over to you, to take full responsibility for what happened, at least what I've done, and see what happens. Right? It's like a fully embodied sense of the personal responsibility that you're getting there. And those experiences are really powerful. They're really transformative. And a lot of people, I think, would say, they're sober today because they did those things. So sort of like it's that strong of a experience, right? Which also means, that's why I anticipate some people being sort of resistant towards resistance recovery stuff, or like hesitant about resistance recovery stuff because, hey, no, when I took personal responsibility, my life changed. That's huge for me, right?
Yeah,
So that's one layer of thinking that I've got about that. Do you have something on that?
I got a couple things, but keep
Yeah.
going.
Okay.
Keep going for now.
Um, so the second little thread I want to draw into this is that we had talked a little bit last time about historical trauma or intergenerational trauma. And we sort of complicated thoughts about selfishness with thoughts about trauma, especially trauma that's like, it's been going through your family lineage for generations. Whether that just be personal stuff, or that be like genocide and enslavement and other things like that that may have happened to your ancestors. That those reverberations are still felt in your life in ways that like you're not responsible for, right? Um, so healing from that was, we were talking about like healing from being the recipient of intergenerational trauma. But I think there's another side to that coin, which is that would be this notion: if there's intergenerational trauma, is there also intergenerational amends to be made? Which takes, how do I explain this? I mean, at a very simple level, it's something like this: if I steal $10 from you, then I owe you $10 and an amends. If my dad steals $10 from you and gives it to me, I owe
Oh,
you $10 at least, right?
right.
And if that goes down the generations, there's a question of like,
Oof.
my ancestors perpetuated genocide, enslavement, etc., upon yours, and I'm benefiting from that in ways that you are suffering from.
Yeah.
And we are on these opposite sides of this historical scale in ways that I am not personally responsible for. I didn't do those things in the past. And so often I think our connection to those events, we sort of hand wave that. I'm talking about white people mostly, or whatever, or men maybe. and say like, oh, well, I didn't do that, so I don't have any responsibility towards that. But the person who's suffering from those consequences can't say the same thing. They can't just wash it away. They can't just move it away. I saw a really good metaphor for this somewhere, and I'm forgetting who said it or exactly how it went. So, but it was something like, if your ancestors invented this hotel where people are enslaved and tortured all the time, and then you leave it to you to inherit, and you're not racist at all, you're just a real nice person with no bad intentions towards anybody, but you keep running the hotel the same way, then what's the difference, right?
Sure.
So there's a question about, is there a sense of like a broader sense of responsibility that I might be able to bring to, I don't know, something like an amends? I'm not sure that has to go on anybody's amends list, but is there some kind of way that I can think more broadly about my responsibility to the world that I'm in as a person, my ecological responsibility, my responsibility towards intergenerational trauma, and so forth?
Yeah. Well, you certainly started us off with two giant things.
Right.
My head is firing. I guess right now I'm feeling like the smaller of the two,
Mm-hmm.
the first one for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that about this business about responsibility, um, I don't know if it's correct to say there's an as if element. That sounds a little too ironic or something, but
Yeah.
but when I'm making amends for something I did in the throes of alcoholism or heroin addiction, I, even though if I drove a car drunk and killed a bunch of people, they would certainly put me in prison as well. They should.
Sure.
I'm the only agent you can really hold accountable.
Right.
But if I am, you know, 15 years old and already a drug addict, and I've taken up but got these habits of theft and lying and deceit, mistreating girls, all this and that. At some point, I'm really out of control. Um, so when I make an amends for that behavior, the only I'm making amends for this version of me that was out of control, right?
Right.
Which implies that in order to make amends, I have to get to a place where I'm capable of doing it. And so many addicts will say that, during active addiction, they'll feel they get sober for periods or wake up with a hangover, they're contrite,
Yeah.
and they'll be genuinely contrite, and they'll try to make amends, or they'll say they're sorry usually,
Mm-hmm.
and then they turn around and they do it again because there's some lack of agency. They're not in control. So I mean that's this interesting thing that I through the recovery process I get to a place where I can take account of take responsibility for what I did, because now I'm capable of doing that, right?
Yeah.
And the idea moving forward from that is that, and this kind of segues into your second point, that having arrived at a place where I can own the consequences of my addiction, the consequences of my behavior, I may now have a skill set that will let somebody else do the same. I can be an instrument in someone else's recovery by
Right.
virtue of having gotten to that place.
Sure.
So the larger question then becomes, and I think this is very resistance recovery, does that mean that with a little more work, a little extra work, a little deeper digging, do I have the ability to take responsibility for some of the forces that caused me to be an addict to begin with, especially the way those forces play out in an adolescent boy.
Right.
I tend to think they do, although I don't think that's a given without work.
I mean, there's work
You
to
have
do
to
there.
you have to be able to analyze, I don't know, it depends on your situation, but family dynamics, intergenerational trauma, perhaps racism, perhaps
Right.
God knows what.
Right. You have to be able to see those things, take account of them, see how they shape your life, and then respond to
Right.
that. Right.
And see how would it explore and name what it means to live without those things controlling your life. Because they're obviously going to
Mm-hmm.
still impact
Mm-hmm.
or controlling your life to the point where it feeds something like drug addiction and despair.
Right. There may be some value too in not just seeing how that happened. Well, I think there's real value in seeing how it happened historically, but I think that we don't do that normally exactly in our inventory process. We don't say how
No.
have social forces X, Y, and Z shaped my experience. That's like you get that when you go to sociology 101, right?
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. That's exactly
um,
right.
and so those things are untouched by a normal four-step inventory and can persist. Meaning you may roll right back into the same kind of you said this to me one time really well, which is I think you borrowed this from White Bison, but it was like you take a sick tree out of a sick forest and get it well and put it back in the sick forest, you get a sick tree.
Yeah.
Right. Which and I feel like maybe there's some of that going on, like the cultural sickness that we are born out of, that we then heal from, that we then return to, and then we're doing the same garbage. We're not necessarily getting high, but kind of shaped by the same forces in the same way, in ways that are problematic downstream for other people. Right.
Right. And I think that's a good reason to, for people to spend a lot more 12 steppers in particular, or rank and file AA people, to look at the whole concept of process addictions,
Mm-hmm.
the shopping and the phone and the steroids and all these things. I mean, Alexander defines addiction as something that is an overwhelming involvement
Mm-hmm.
with the substance or an activity that is harmful to you in your social relations.
Right.
So, how often do people make real progress in recovery and then succumb to something like that and maybe never relapse again?
Sure.
And yet, like you say, downstream, they're causing all kinds of harm.
Right.
And yet, by these sort of narrow definitions of recovery and addiction, they're doing okay.
If we just say, well, I didn't take a drug again,
Yeah,
but I'm doing all this other horseshit, right?
right.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
a real sort of moral and cultural critique in that might be more than a lot of people are actually comfortable
Right.
with. And that's book club we're going to do. I think speaks to a lot of that.
Right. Right. So the notion is that part of the reason why somebody slips into sex addiction after getting off of heroin or whatever is because it's there in the culture, it's there in their history, it's there in their bodies, and then off they go.
Right,
It's not
and
just a simple.
they're still using sex as a way to regulate their affect and any impact that may have on other people is really secondary.
Right. Right. I want to bring this back around to the responsibility piece. Um, I think there's a way to talk about responsibility that is not identical to it's your fault. Like taking ownership or blame of something is not necessarily the same thing as taking responsibility for something. And it's kind of an edge casey, but it's like, I don't know, if my kid does something of his own free will and it causes a problem at school or something, and I'm called to show up and I need to respond for my child, right? Um, if I'm the boss at the company or something, and an employee does something stupid, and then I have to be the public face of the company and respond for the behavior of it. Now, there might be systemic problems there that I'm responsible for directly, but sometimes you respond. Responsibility might just mean you're able to respond to something. You're able to stand in the place and take accountability for something that you're related to in some way, not necessarily the
Yes.
only agent for.
Yes.
So personal responsibility maybe is like pushing really hard on like it's all your agency. But responsibility itself can just sort of be these things have happened in my story and I'm here to respond for them. Right?
Yeah, I think I really like where you're going with this. I think that a good example of this would be a whistleblower.
Yeah, right,
So a whistleblower didn't do it,
right,
but she works for a company that does things that are beyond the pale.
mm-hmm.
So she will represent that company and pay the consequences and be responsible.
Right, right,
I think the thing about that that's so interesting is that of late, for the last, I don't know, probably, I know it was going back beyond the last administration. I think it was, we were reading about this, that whistleblowers are being, not being defended, they're being
right,
scapegoated. So it's
right.
like, yeah, there's a lot of like sort of snitch culture around it or something.
Sure.
Um,
Well, I mean, look at Chelsea Manning, right?
exactly.
Here's all these war
Or
crimes.
look at Edward Snowden. Look
Right,
at, yeah.
right,
Um, so if dislocation and all this is right, then it would suggest that this really speaks to your second question. Maybe it's time for us to be, maybe we're being asked to be responsible for more and more things.
right. Which doesn't mean to say blame ourselves for something. It means to step forward and say, right,
Yeah.
what's
I mean,
true?
this was crucial to, like you see this in Russian theology, but especially in figures like Dostoevsky, he would just, in his novels, he was finally coming out and saying that we are all implicated in the guilt, that by virtue of our humanity,
Hmm.
we are implicated in the humanity perpetuated against one another. And that I think he was saying that that kind of perspective would be the only way that we could start reconciling.
Right, right. So we're responsible as human beings.
Yeah,
We're responsible as Americans, as
right.
whatever we are, as whatever identity categories we fit into. We can be responsible in that space.
Right.
There's also an interesting way in which, like, when I make amends, even out of the sense of personal responsibility, with strong emphasis on the personal, I did this thing. And in a lot of cases, it's really like, I took your money.
Right.
It's not like I'm not going to rest back and, like, oh, social forces or whatever. Even
I,
though
I wasted your time.
I wasted your
I
time.
betrayed your trust.
I broke your heart. I did, right? All these things. Um, and in that moment of the highest level of personal responsibility you can get, there's a sort of a transcendence of the personal, in the sense that it's no longer about, so much of the recovery process is about me and my inner workings and my feelings and stuff. And then I go and I stand it from somebody else and say, this is how I harmed you, or tell me how I harmed you. And I open up this space, and it's not about me. It's about them. It's about the thing that happened between us. I'm trying to heal something interpersonal rather than something that's all inside here. And that suddenly my recovery becomes like fully social and relational in a way that it hasn't yet. I mean, it is relational. All my resentments are about my relationships, and when I'm standing there, man, it's like, right?
Right. And I think the to speak to this point we're just coming out of, it's uh, I may be standing in for a host of shitbag boyfriends.
Sure.
I might be standing in for
Right.
a line of bad bosses.
Right. Right.
I might be the guy who scapegoated and bullied you, and you have lived a life of scapegoated and bullied.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where we're really kind of bridging.
Sure.
Yeah,
For that person, meaning for that person, I'm one in a line of garbage in their lives. And
that's
then
right.
I show up and take responsibility, not just for what I've done, but in their eyes, it's this opportunity to heal from the whole line, or
Right.
at least begin that healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything about that way of talking that is like so, resistance recovery or dislocation theory that it challenges 12-step orthodoxy.
Right.
Um, but then I think maybe it might be important to contrast that with, I think White Bison's really good because profiles of the kind of addicts that we rarely find ourselves in meetings with. And it's not necessarily race. I tend to think it's much class as anything. But, people who have suffered such indignities, such crimes against their person that, White Bison talks about, we need to forgive the unforgivable.
Right.
And they're in a place where their forgiveness and their healing is of such huge importance for the future generations. And that's one thing that I mean, we do touch that a little bit in 12-step world where, I come from a line of drunks,
Yeah.
this sort of thing, but it's not nearly, it's so much more personal.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. If 99% of your people were the victims of genocide and you're living downstream from that, it's
right.
different than grandpa.
Or I'm an alcoholic, actively alcoholic First Nations person who is seeing the news about 200 and then 600 mass graves of children, apparently.
Right.
What do you do?
Right. And I think that a corresponding question that's more relevant to us is like, what do we do with that as white people, as downstream from the benefactors of that?
Well, we don't have to do anything about it as, alcoholics in recovery if we're never around those alcoholics in recovery from those communities.
Right. Right.
That really gets me.
Right.
Right.
Meaning that if we were in community with them and they were experiencing this, then we had some healing and recovery, and they had some healing. We could sort of facilitate. There's something could happen between us that
we could learn something.
We should, for hell, yeah.
It's really weird. I'll mention it. I won't name any names, but there was this thing on our YouTube page where pretty hardcore 12-stepper called Trauma, the Flavor of the Month. And, you can imagine how that went over. And I didn't think to say this, but I don't think, Don C. of White Bison would call Trauma the flavor of the month.
No, that's the taste of generations.
Right. That's the air you breathe.
Right.
That's your nervous system.
Right. Right. And so I'm projecting on this guy, but what I imagine is he's saying that out of like this sort of ethos of like you just own all your shit and off you go. You're a fine individual in the middle of society and back to it.
Yeah, and he was also kind of saying that, these sort of fads pass through in the recovery world, but in the last analysis, we still have this big book.
Right. I've certainly felt that way in the past. I will name myself as guilty of that kind of thinking when I would think anything that sounded like it was from a treatment center or sounded like it was from pop psychology was immediately suspect and like on the shit lists. Just the big book, that's all there is. So I had that kind of mentality, and it lasted a while.
Yeah,
But
no,
it
I mean,
didn't get me
I'm sure I still slide into it
right.
about certain things. I'll notice this, that, when I started noticing uh, groups of people for whom the steps didn't work, and there was part of me that could see that it was, often there was something going on there with literacy and
Sure.
economic privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And I never, I never thought of those things in terms of trauma. And my mind was incapable of going, well, you know, trauma is wrapped in there with the absence of privilege.
Right.
Traumatized brain does not learn readily as all
Yeah.
that. I was not able to even think like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a bit of shame about my unwillingness to, or my inability to see that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
because in a way it was there right in front of us in Farmington.
Sure.
Because, some of those people that we were hanging out with had pretty rough backgrounds.
Right. Yeah. 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 Western Maine, when paper mills close down and whatever, and leave towns without work and all that kind of hard blue collar economic pain that you get around the country. It's all right
Hard
there.
drinking and
Yeah.
sexual violence.
And generations of it.
For generations.
Right.
That's right.
Which is also a kind of trauma and also a kind of historical trauma that I don't want to minimize. Right.
No, no, God, no.
Right.
We do that at our own peril.
Yeah.
That's the sort of inability to see who disenfranchised white voters really are.
Right. Right. So I don't know if there's I don't think there's a clean answer or way forward from what we're discussing here, but I do think there's something in this soup that's potentially productive, right? There's some kind of sense about responsibility or a larger sense of amends making or
I do think bringing up white bison, though, is a sort of segue.
mm-hmm.
Um, it's a way it's a good step in recontextualizing step work and recovery for everyone.
Sure.
By taking that extreme example, we can sheds light on.
Right. 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 So we have a lot to learn from them right now, even if we can read their books. The books are available, their documentaries are available.
Right, but the idea that step work is as much about forgiveness as anything, sometimes there are people for whom, the injuries they've suffered far exceed the ones they've perpetrated, or the way the injuries are visited on others, grandparents, and so on. Yeah, I really do. It's like just talking to you in a way is interesting because I'm always sort of doing all that in my head, but to hear myself say it makes it seem bigger, and it makes the older 12-step version of Piers seem pretty naive.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Same. I actually even want to go back to something we said at the beginning, or I said, which was like, you don't learn those things until sociology 101,
Right.
Which is kind of a privileged position to be in. Like,
Right.
you don't get the social analysis of how things have affected you until you get to college or something. When if you're alcoholic on the res, you don't have to go to sociology 101 to know
No.
how your history affects you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. If you're doing a bid for a drug crime in Attica, and
Right. Right.
yeah, that's interesting because having to learn things that way as opposed to learning it from the people themselves could only happen by being proximate to those people.
Right.
Um,
Which does point to a different problem in recovery circles, which is how white 12-step organizations tend to be.
and even bigger than that, or I don't know if it's bigger, but only this narrow percentage of people can access treatment.
Right.
So people would be shocked if they knew that only like 1 in 5 people can access treatment right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's class.
That's because it costs. Yeah, for sure.
Because of cost and who has insurance and all that. And
Yeah.
so the kind of problems that they show up with are going to be reflective of that group of people. Now, there's some crossover for sure. But I think the trauma piece is
Yeah.
it's so funny how the taboo on having this conversation prevents you from actually seeing the problem,
Even in your own life.
even in your own life. So you never learn this stuff. Really, I mean, maybe the programs where you do, you get a master's in counseling or social work. Hope you still learn some of that, but it's really not a focus.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent you learn about it, it's incidental. I mean, they have to pay lip service to multiculturalism, but they don't really get into the gritty of it. And then we're discouraged from talking about it in the recovery world. Those are powerful taboos. That's strong. Those are strong.
Right.
That's an outside issue.
Yeah. Outside
People,
issue limits our vision quite significantly.
it really does.
In ways that are like prevent the kind of conversation like this, but also prevent people from saying like, I seem to be watching more porn every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's an outside issue.
Right.
I seem to be like spending all my money.
Yeah.
Every time I get some, it's gone. Like, you're not supposed to talk. That's like, all those process addictions you're talking about, which is so really common to get sober off a substance and fall into a process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you have to go to a different meeting in order to talk about it when it's all part of the same recovery.
Yeah.
You have to wear 9 hats to be like, to get any kind of sense of wellness.
I was at a meeting once in Maine. It was a pretty rough guy, and he says he's complaining about how much weight he gained when he got sober. He says, Jesus, all I do is eat and eat and eat, and my girlfriend would just feed me and feed me and feed me. Then she broke up with me. He goes, now I'm so fat nobody wants me.
Oh.
Oh, so good.
He's right, and he's nailing it. He's even did people give him shit for that, or was he okay?
No, because it's so funny. We all just laughed. But so then we arrive at this place. Let's just get all kind of a deal that you're one of the ones who can stand up and tell men's stories in meetings.
Yeah.
You're the ones who can honestly say that around that time, making amends, and since that time, you no longer have the mental obsession. And now you're in this, call it a maintenance phase or growth phase, but it's different. And that all looks kind of different now in light of what we just talked about, right?
Yeah, I think the term maintenance is an interesting one. People generally talk about steps 10, 11, 12 as that.
Yeah.
Maintenance, like the boat it floats and it goes, the engine works, and you're just on there like oiling gears and turning screws and keeping it going.
You know how to do it now.
Know how to do it, keep doing it, don't fuck it up. And it's not like it's not that you're done or fixed because you have to continually revisit this, but it's also like you hit a kind of a ceiling. Like, this is it, you've arrived, this is the thing, now keep what you've got, right? Which on one hand is really true and important. Like, you are fucking sober, you don't want to give that up, and you've had some really important experiences and insights and stuff that you don't want to lose track of, and all the tools we've acquired along the way are super useful. I've definitely had like resentments that after I wrote 4th step that were then amenable to 10th step inventory, and made my life a lot better to be able to be like, okay, I don't think I could have stayed married as long as I did without that kind of stuff. That maintenance kind of attitude of like, oh, here's the problem again. Let's work on it.
Yeah.
But the notion that is like you've sort of hit the top of what recovery can be, and now you're just gonna sail your ship across the sea, feels limiting. And I think prevents us from looking at ways in which we're actually, so the contrast of the maintenance metaphor is the growth metaphor, I think.
Yeah, growing in effectiveness and understanding.
Right. And yeah, in fact, both of those metaphors are in the book, right?
Yeah.
But they're pretty different frames of mind about what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If we just stay in maintenance mode and don't go flip over into growth mode.
But effectiveness and understanding seems to be, I mean, understanding is the one that you could probably run with and turn it into what you want, but it really seems to be relevant to the 12th step.
Right.
I grow in my effectiveness as a sponsor or delivering this message. I mean, that's the way I take it anyway.
Yeah.
Always taken it. Yeah.
Sure. It seems relevant to that context it's set in.
Yeah.
So it's not saying like effectiveness as a human being in the world, effectiveness as like an emissary of God's healing powers, not effectiveness as like, I guess as an agent of recovery, because as a sponsor, that's what you are. You have recovery and you're trying to give it to somebody else, and hopefully that keeps spreading and spreading and spreading. But within the bounds of what isn't taboo, what isn't an outside issue.
Right.
So you don't get recovered and then think we need, I don't know.
We need to change the insurance system. We need to have a commission on prescribing addictive drugs to children. We need to prison reform.
Right.
We
need an investigation of the missionary schools in America to coincide with the ones that happen in Canada. We need to think about the way that we as a culture are addicted to things like fossil fuels and consumerism in ways that are destructive of all life on the planet.
Right.
I mean, that's not how we're supposed to, that's not growth of the effectiveness and understanding is not, none of that is implied
Yeah.
in that statement. But we're attempting to imply it.
We are,
Yeah.
and there's the word itself can be taken that way, but there's also, page uh, 20. I mean, there's this statement that, nobody pays attention to the implications of this for what we're talking about. Page 19.
Okay.
Of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious.
Right.
And virtually all of those, especially the first three, medical, psychiatric, and social, or I should really say psychiatric and social,
Mhm.
are the ones where the taboo is strongest.
Right.
Because if social smells anything like political, then that's taboo. And then psychiatric, of course, is
Right. It's taboo. Yeah.
so that's written in 37, 8, or 9, and then by the time we get traditions, we have the strong 10th tradition about outside contribution.
Right. Right.
So Bill writing that, he had to have had some awareness that, or some experience with people that are, taking tranquilizers or adamant that they can't do step work because of their religious background, or
Mhm.
he had to be encountering things that we still encounter today.
Right.
Then he backed off it.
Sure. Yeah. With the primary purpose kind of a statement, or
Well, it's primary purpose, 10th tradition.
yeah. Right.
Um,
So I mean, I'm not. Hmm. There was a time when
I'm
I
not
felt
even sure how I feel about it either.
yeah.
I mean,
Right.
I'm not sure I feel whether that's a lamentable thing,
Right. Yeah. Sure.
or is the real issue that we have to have another forum to do what we're doing.
Yeah. I think. Yeah. That's kind of how I'm leaning. I mean, I used to feel very strongly that like we could take hold of the 12-step movement and perform it for.
Yeah, God, we were morons.
Turn it back from the brink, and you know what I mean. And I wasn't even trying to turn it the way I would turn it now, right? Turn it back to some kind of religious zealotry out of the big book fundamentalism or something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but
You don't want to do this. Go.
yeah, yeah, right. So I don't know that like that we're gonna. I don't think there's much to be accomplished in the way of reforming institutions like Alcoholics Anonymous, or Narcotics Anonymous, or I think there's great work to be done within those institutions. You can start a meeting, you can share your story, you can express all kinds of things. You can, share ideas and have your own experience and sponsor people. It's all great work to do. But in terms of like the ideas that we're talking about and the conversations we're having, I think that resistance recovery exists because it doesn't find a home in those places. It's not welcomed there. In fact, it's like you say, it's explicitly sort of verboten by the structures and traditions. So it's essentially going to be something outside of a 12-step program. And I'm not even sure that resistance recovery would want to be a 12-step program. Right? I mean, it's 12-step
the issue, true. And the problem becomes, though, what if those so-called outside issues are directly relevant to your recovery as a fifth-generation alcoholic from an Irish family?
Right.
What if it really would make a difference?
Yeah, then you're not going to find it there.
Yeah,
so where are you going to find it?
Yeah. And the thing, one of the things that I don't probably you might read it from the book we're going to do, but he talks about how much of an identity a person has as a function of the individual's relationship to an institution. You belong to this family, this club, this movement, and doesn't preclude you from
Uh-oh.
critiquing the movement or being a pain in the ass to the movement, but it's a source of identity.
Mhm.
And that identity becomes much harder as institutions, including ones like family and neighborhood, um, disappear.
Right.
So there is part of me that feels that whatever this thing is, it fills in the gap. It has to have some semblance of an institution.
Sure. But not a reform movement within its institution, but its
That's
own
right.
institution. Yeah.
One in dialogue, perhaps, with other institutions, or
Right.
conflict with them.
Right. Right. But so yeah. And what does that look like? I guess that's now we're reaching into questions of like what ought resistance recovery itself as an entity do and be. You know,
Yeah.
does it need meetings and stuff like that? Which maybe takes us a little bit outside the realm of what should 10, 11, 12 look like.
No, yeah, no, I think you're right. And that's probably another conversation. But
Yeah.
just sitting here thinking, now let's compare, uh, let's just say it's 12. Let's compare 12
Sure.
to 11 for a second.
Yeah.
So we're talking about information that's relevant to recovery that you can't talk about in recovery.
Right. Yep.
In 11, there's a kind of interesting parallel where, our understanding of the value of 11 extends far beyond what it did when the book was written.
Sure.
So Bill's pretty cool about making it wide open. There's plenty of books, and you
Yeah.
should shy away from religion, but you shouldn't feel compelled, and all that's all great. That's some of the real strength of the thing. But now we're at a point where the value of that stuff has been corroborated by science.
Right. Sure.
But, yoga and meditation and
Right.
prayer and all these things, they actually
Sure.
have a plethora of physical
Studies.
benefits.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that is not, none of that is as challenging to the status quo of treatment or AA.
You can go in a meeting and talk about whatever your 11-step practice is and call it
Yeah.
an
And you
11-step
could,
practice and it fits.
and you could probably say, no wonder I felt better. Then I read this John Cabot Zen book, and he said, "Oh yeah, that'll lower your blood pressure, and that'll improve sleep and sexual performance, and all these
Right.
things." And you're like, "Who would have thought?" Right?
Right. Right.
However, if you keep pushing even the 11-step envelope, you're going to wind up in that trauma world still.
Tell me what you mean.
Well, there's such a strong correlation between stress and trauma and addiction.
Oh, sure.
That's what's driving the show. So to take up practices that relieve you from the sympathetic nervous response, then wow.
Right.
So you'll even wind up there if you keep pushing the envelope. You'll still
So,
wind up in the social etiology.
right. You may not. Well, so if you're reading and studying in your 11th step, for sure you'll end up pushing into that stuff. But you might even sitting with like say I decide I'm a centering prayer guy, which I did for 5 years, or a Zen guy or whatever, and you're going to sit and you're going to do that practice, and it's every day for years and years and years. You're saying eventually you'll hit a point where you're like, stuff is coming to surface that is more than just.
Or you might just notice that, the sponsees that you can get to do it benefit, and the ones who don't can't, or you'll notice that the people are showing up differently than they were 10 years ago, and
Right.
looks like stress and trauma, and yeah, I don't know. It
Yeah.
just seems to me that there's no I mean, I do think it's possible for people to not ask those questions and have a nice, tight
Sure.
meditation practice
Right.
that really has efficacy. I do think that's possible. It seems to me, though, you know, the longer you're at this, the harder you're almost got to go ostrich after a while.
Right.
Like, what the fuck is going on, and why is this getting so bad? And these people showing up in meetings, oh my god,
Mhm.
you know, that's where I am in now. I mean, when we have staff meeting now, and we sit there and we go through the clients, I mean, we're often like we're blown away. We're marveling
Right.
at the kind of baggage they're bringing now.
Right.
And those are the percentage of people who can access treatment.
Right. Right. Not even the people that can't even
So,
get there.
like, what is it like out on?
So you're saying to me that maybe addiction's getting worse out there than it was when we were.
Oh, I would stake everything.
And not just in the sense of like there's more of it and there's more deaths, but the lived experience of individual addicts, similar situations to us, is going to be.
It came to me for the first time last week, which kind of shocked me. It took it this long for it to come to me. I said to myself, Bill Wilson had it so much easier.
I don't know.
Because even though it was the Depression,
Mm-hmm.
there were still these sort of vibrant institutions in American life that you did not think that, oh, where's he going to go to? You know, the father's a workaholic and the mother's got her own problems. And the only social activity he does outside of doing drugs is playing games. I mean, I don't, whatever. You know, if you read that early AA, we're doing potlucks and we're going out. You know, well, you know, I had a guy. I don't know if you remember him. There was a guy who came around the same time as you, and he's gotten better. He's one of Mikey's guys, and he says to me one day, he goes, "Remember how it was back in chapter 2?" And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Remember how we always went to Irving's afterwards?" And I go, "Oh yeah." I go, the that would often be better than the meeting. He goes, "Exactly."
Mm.
He goes, "Nobody does that.
Mm.
Or if they do, they're all sitting at the table like this."
Right.
So yeah, I think the getting worse is definitely true. And I think that more than anything explains, and this just could be my perspective, what I what what I perceive to be the diminished efficacy of step work. Not that step work isn't the best modality that ever came down the pike. I think it still is, but the people are so they're it's not meeting them the same.
More alienated than ever.
More alienated
isolated than ever.
Yeah, it was like this Kent Dunnington interview I did a while ago where he said, he described those young people. He goes, "Remember, there's no contrasting set," is what he said. So, you know, when Piers is a drug addict in 1994, he gets a heroin habit or something, I'm like, shit. You know, the money's running out. I'm not going to the gym anymore. I lost the girlfriend.
Right.
There's contrasting.
Contrast.
Here's
Sure.
his
Okay.
life. You know, still an addict, but before heroin. Like,
Yeah.
and whereas if you're a kid who's been medicated or abusing drugs and digital pornography, and that's your world,
It's an
then
alternative to look back to. You didn't lose anything.
yeah,
It's just
it's
where
not
you
like
live.
that's right. It's not when I was in the bowling league with my dad,
Right. Right.
where I had that nice girlfriend.
There was no point of connection to refer back to that you could say, I missed that. I'm really searching for
Right.
interaction in a certain way or like a point of meaning. Well, so this is telling me that like we're the point about Irving's, I think, is interesting because it shows like an erosion in the fellowship.
Right.
Which is interesting
Which,
too.
if you're not doing steps, is the value and strength of the whole thing.
Right. And even if you're not, or even if you
I mean,
are,
if you
there's
are,
still a
it's
lot of
right.
value in it.
Yeah, huge, huge. Can't do it by yourself. That's for damn sure.
Can't do it by yourself. And there's something about being a family of addicts together and sharing a level of experience together and sorting out like, what are you learning and what are you feeling and what are you experiencing versus what am I going through? And
Right.
people
And
you can count on to be like, hey, this is my marriage is in trouble. I need someone to talk to about it and help me through this. And it might not, the answer might not be right inventory. The answer might be something else. But
yeah,
like having people you can rely on to be there for you and share a common identity is what Irving's felt like, right?
it
And if
sure
you
did.
don't
And it
have
was
that, then what do you got?
and it was often so wonderful because you really are sitting there with people that are really different from you.
Yep.
Like, wow, I like this guy.
Yeah.
You're enjoying the conversation and it's full of surprise and wonder and
Yeah.
humanity. And,
Yeah. So we need fellowship, and fellowship also seems like it's I mean, this is certainly how the big book talks about it. It's a product of step work. It's a, we have more than the Titanic people or whatever the hell it was. Like, we didn't just survive. We're now like connected by the
it
solution.
he says on that is on page 17.
Yeah.
But if that in itself was all that brought us together, we would not be held together as we are now joined. So just this problem, as the fact is, we found a common solution.
It should be a
Common problem,
fruit.
common solution. That's right.
Yeah.
An identity, an institution.
Right, right. And that ought to be one of the fruits of step work is people with that shared experience bonding together around it and sharing some part of their lives together about
Yeah.
it.
And what, and to maybe defend the old James and Piers a
Yeah.
little bit, is I think what we were, at least I'm pretty sure what I was hoping is that if we went back to the roots and started doing these things, that we could revitalize this
Yeah.
and that would spread.
Right.
And it seemed like, you know, it did start kind of, it wasn't what we anticipated, but we did see it spread and we did see, or at least I've seen enough of my own experiences kind of replicated. That seemed to go on for a while, but where we are now, that did not,
Yeah.
it met these new headwinds or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to think a lot of that was just human nature. A lot of it was greed or laziness or
Sure.
this or that.
Sure.
But now, you read some of these authors we read and they're like, no, the timing of, especially your timing
Mm-hmm.
of recovery really was coming along when there were massive changes in American society.
Right. Right.
I mean, if you tie mine, it's kind of interesting because mine dovetails just so much with the birth of digital culture.
Sure. Internet shows
Yours
up.
does too, really.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
I got my first email address not that many years before.
right.
It was still pretty new. September 11th was in the first year of my sobriety.
Oh, it was.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I do recall that. Yeah.
Yeah, you were not happy about it. We don't have to go too far into that right now. That's quite a story. But that whole change in like global culture and
Yeah.
global understandings of what's happening and the reorganization of the all kinds of things
Right.
happened there.
So you get sober in 9/11.
Yeah.
Then in 2002, you start the second chapter 2 group, which is still going in Portland. And you start seeing those things spread kind of in the North and South Shore of Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Plymouth House starts in 2002. And, for a while it was definitely chugga, 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 chugga. This thing was spreading, but then it was, and you didn't really notice it when it happened. This stuff started happening. There was a dilution of it. There was money grab.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people got disgusted
Hmm.
that were kind of players that just
It's still spreading. It's just not spreading what we thought it would, or the way we thought it
yeah,
would.
yeah, that's right.
But yeah, there's the ideal that's sort of stated in the big book for this phase of recovery is not just that you'll chug along like a boat, but that you'll really do the spreading that we're talking about. And it says like this is an approximation, but it's like the simple talk of my friends at my dinner table spreads in a
Ever widening circles
circle
of
of peace and goodwill, right?
right. And I do feel like that we have more on the front end, but we were living in this thing where it really was this kind of fucking Jimmy Stewart movie.
Yeah,
We were witnessing the instantiation, the realization of certain ideals in that
yeah,
book,
yeah.
and it was powerful.
And then it fucking blew up.
Yeah,
One of the biggest disillusionments of my recovery has been, holy shit, we're living in this all this creative spiritual potential, and it's happening, and it's growing, and it's spreading, and then you see behind the scenes of it, and you see the results, and it's like, what the fuck happened? And I still don't have a good answer. That's still something that like eats at me, and it's kind of like corrupt. I don't know, corrupting is not quite right, but it's like definitely a problem in my recovery. It's like, what? I'm disillusioned.
Mhm.
Um, I liked my illusion. I liked my illusion that we were the center of, spiritual spread of goodwill.
I
And
like some of the really more seemingly smaller and trivial pieces of it.
hmm
Reading the same books and talking and
yeah,
10 cups of bad coffee and
hmm
funny stories.
yeah. Certain pieces of it, you're right. Certain pieces of it that I would not have valued or known to value at the time, I look back on and think that was the thing.
I know it's so wild, and you're like the reason why I took that for granted was because I had every assumption that it would continue,
Yeah,
that it was just baked into the thing and it would continue in the future.
yeah,
And yet that is the thing that those are the things that I really miss. Those are the flavors.
yeah. For me, it's almost always these little moments in between meetings and in between travel to talk or something. And it's like people who have some kind of experience really, really trying to work out what it means together, really trying to share
And
that
then,
with each
and then
other.
the newer person that has the powerful, new, fresh experience
Oh,
sharing.
yeah, right.
Yeah, that was such a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone pretty far. I think we should
Yeah.
just spend a few minutes at any rate talking about um, the 12th step.
hmm
And I don't know how jaded you are on that one, but um, for me, because so much of my work involved 12-step delivery, it still does,
hmm
that I just eventually just said, I can't do it. I can't,
hmm
because I do so much of this kind of in the trenches work, I can't do it anymore. So I stopped doing it.
Meaning you stopped going to meetings and trying to get a sponsee.
Well, I don't sponsor people.
Right. Okay.
Now, what I've done instead is I will track former clients. I don't do the nuts and bolts sponsorship, but I call it, mentorship.
Uh-huh.
Like, so I'll get these guys, one of these guys that came out of prison, and I'll help them with college,
hmm
help them with their reading, and we'll often be in the recovery wheelhouse the way we're talking and all that. But no, I don't do it anymore.
Yeah. I haven't in a while. I have a sponsee now that's going good. Um, but I haven't been in meetings for a while looking for it or carrying the message, sharing my story that way. I haven't, I mean, COVID is a reason, but there's plenty of Zoom meetings that I could be in and I'm not. I do like that when I say that it's a problem in my recovery, the sort of like looking behind the scenes and being disillusioned, it definitely is like made it harder for me to like read the big book or think about going to meetings. For a while here, I was in a big book study meeting and it was good and it fell apart, kind of classically. And there's some that are a little more like uh, clicky in a way that was like super obvious and like disheartening. And then some that are really fucking rigid, like you wear a suit and tie when you're my sponsee, in a way that's off-putting. And it's sort of like, man, I've been through all those phases. The best meetings that I found here were just like, I just go to an NA meeting and I just won't say shit about steps and I'll just talk about my week and I'll hang out with all you guys and we'll just be here together. That was really healing for me when I was doing it. But yeah, in terms of the work that I used to do, like I always had a meeting that was like, I founded this meeting and I'm gonna be there, I'm gonna show up for it no matter what. We'll see if it grows or not, or and then I have another meeting where I go and I'm searching around for a way to carry my message in a little kind of a different way. And it's faded into, I'm working with Matt on the All Addicts Anonymous literature. We have regular meetings around that. That's kind of the center of that sort of work. And we're doing this, and I'm writing. It's not like I've
Well, I
fallen out
mean,
of.
yeah, I mean, I guess my question for you is, you did the dissertation essentially, like,
Yeah. So I'm interviewing people, and right.
but the thing that I would say that's so interesting, I don't know if you listened to that Weird Studies episode.
Which one?
I don't remember, but it was JF, and he was talking about, it was the one about Osho, the one about the Bhagavad Rajneesh.
Oh
But
no,
what he
yeah,
talked about is he was kind of taking exception to the spiritual, not religious thing.
yeah,
And he says, religious, his idea of it, not so much the Orthodox following.
right,
He said it's
right,
when something grabs you and there's this thing that'll happen as a result of that, that you can't let it go and it won't let go of you.
sure, okay,
And I didn't think about you, of course, it's not about me.
right. Oh,
But I'm like, you know what? Then if that's the way we're gonna think about this, then I am as much of a 12-stepper as I ever was.
okay.
Because it's like a marriage or something. Yeah, I got problems with
Yeah,
some
yeah,
shit.
right, right.
And there's some things I really don't like, and there's some things that don't seem to change. But I am existentially rooted in this.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. It's not like I've like thrown it all away and gone on some like mission to something else. It's like you said, it's like a marriage. Like I'm very much informed and everything about me is 12-steppy and it's super problematic. And
Yeah,
I'm not doing all the same things I used to do because I'm searching for something new,
yeah. But
searching for a new way to do this.
but we're both sort of rooted. You're rooted in that friggin' being on the floor in the bathroom at the
Yeah,
Mantor Library.
yeah,
You're
yeah, yeah,
rooted in that,
yeah.
right?
That's not going away.
Yeah.
That hasn't gone anywhere.
And I'm rooted in being on my knees in Mount Kisco, New York.
Right.
And so I don't know, that was really helpful for him to hear him say that, because I'm not a tourist with this. So, I
No.
mean, you and I just did a lot of true confession that a lot of 12-steppers will have a problem with. You don't go to meetings, you don't sponsor anybody, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
What are you?
Right.
But I'm still in it. Maybe not to other people's satisfaction, but
That's right.
I am totally in the game.
We wouldn't be doing this series if we weren't trying to fucking figure this shit out.
Yeah.
We weren't trying to carry this still.
So I guess in concluding, what I would like to say to the audience, and I know we've heard from one person about this, but if there are things in this general ballpark that you would like us to address, please get in touch with either one of us and
Sure.
we will consider it.
Yeah.
We don't want this to necessarily be the end, but it felt like 4 episodes was kind of natural.
Good overview of the content. Yeah. Reach out.
All right. My pleasure. Till I see you again.
Thanks, Piers.